posterity. Yeah, okay. So you're seeing the slides, I hope. It looks like we're recording. So let me
Yep.
go into presentation mode and hide that. So thanks for the introduction. Awesome to be here. I'm going to keep it pretty casual. Yes, this will be about step one a little bit, but also about sort of approaching med school, residency, and beyond, which is something I'm passionate about. So um, I always start with sort of disclosures. I do some consulting work for a medical education company, and that's paid work. And then I also have several grants actually through the AMA. I don't think those have influenced this presentation, but we like to disclose those things. So this is where I grew up. I'm going to do the like little about me so you know who you're talking at, like random person on Zoom. I grew up in Seattle area. This is actually Bainbridge Island, which is a little island, 30 minutes ferry ride from Seattle. This is actually on our beach looking over in Seattle. And it was a great childhood on this kind of suburban island. Um, I ended up going to undergrad at University of Washington. This is the bioengineering building, and graduation day with my grandmother, who actually just passed this year. But did bioengineering very much in the engineering mindset was how I was approaching things. Hadn't had medicine sort of on my radar, but definitely had like the inkling that medical research might be interesting to me, driven by my mom who had breast cancer. So a personal story had kind of driven me towards using an engineering mindset to think through medical problems. I sort of took a detour though. After undergrad, I went to Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia. I lived in Mongolia for a year as a Luce scholar, which is an amazing program you should all check out. You can apply until you're 30 years old. And it lived there for a year, did sort of public health work, but mostly like rode camels, went out to the countryside, had this kind of transformative experience, I think. But really got to thinking about health inequities, health policy issues, how we allocate healthcare. And so after that year in Mongolia, I actually moved to London for a year, lived there with my now wife, and worked in the prion unit, actually. So the variant CJD, Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, it was a unit that was a BSL-3 lab, a lot of isolation, working with human tissues, studying how prion disease works. This was me working in a nanofabrication lab. So I was bringing that sort of engineering stuff into like prion disease, kind of still doing the translational jam. And at the same time doing work in the National Health Service around health economics. So after that, finally made it to med school, which is where it sort of gets more relevant to this audience. I went to Michigan, so yeah, Midwest, go blue. This is graduation with Francis Collins, who was our graduation speaker, and I was the student speaker. And then on the bottom left is match day. So that was like graduation was a huge day for me, but I have to say that the months before the match day was the biggest day of medical school, and I matched at NYU. And during my time at medical school, I was a curriculum representative, and I remember being sort of in your shoes in M1 year. And I actually tracked down this slide because I did a needs assessment of the other students and tried to see like, what are your priorities? What do you want me to work on as your curriculum representative? And right there at the top was step one. It was, crazy that so early they were still thinking about step one. It wasn't on my radar. And so that was the environment then, like 5 years ago or so, 6 years ago now. Um, and now it's gonna hopefully change. But that at that time stimulated me to do some research to try to identify behaviors that predict performance. There was really in our medical school sort of we didn't really know what helped, and we didn't really know what helped people pass or do well. There was some research, but we didn't feel it was very well done, and so we studied our graduates, and we wanted to make it locally appropriate. And this is our publication in academic medicine, and this was work I did as a student in med school. I kind of picked up two things. I like picked up the bug to do education work, education research, but also found that like it was great if you could align that with your own experiences, your own expertise. Um, and so one of the key findings was what folks use, but we also then built models to say, well, controlling for MCAT and preclinical scores and your goal score, what things predict performance. And they were things like starting study early, shocker, using review books like first aid, how many times you go through, doing unique questions as opposed to doing questions repeatedly that were the same questions. So spaced repetition, yes, but repetition of slightly different questions. And so, that informed our advising and informed our work. But it was all still in this very much of like a step one fever. I then went to NYU Langone for residency, and this is NYU. So this is Google Maps. So you got your VA, and like all VAs look the same, I swear. And then in the middle is Bellevue, and in the back is NYU. And we did. It was a crazy 3 years of internal medicine training there, but I loved it. I stayed on as faculty here at NYU as an internal medicine hospitalist. And in addition to working in the hospital, so I only see patients in the hospital at 7 on, 7 off. So I do 7 days on, and then I have 7 days off. But I also have some of my time protected, and this is how this works in academics, where you can get time bought out protected to do research. And so I do research in IIME, which is the Institute for Innovations in Med Ed. And I just wanted to show you sort of one of the projects we're working on, which looks at resident performance. We're trying to predict things of resident performance, like their milestones or how they do with quality measures based on med school stuff you all are doing right now, which med school you go to, their exams, their grades, maybe how we ranked them coming in. And then also data that they handed off, like their work and volunteer experience and accolades and processing text. And it's an initial effort to use some of these more advanced analytics techniques, AI, natural language processing, to do prediction. So that's where some of my research is now. But I also am doing a fair amount of leadership work. And I wanted to put this there not to just like do like brag, but if you guys have questions, we saved a lot of time at the end for questions about all these various things. I'm happy to dig into them. So I am on the editorial board of Academic Medicine, which is a major med ed journal. I've done work for NBME on their effort to review sort of exams and wellness, because we thought step one had created sort of this culture of negative culture around wellness, and we weren't really sure what directionality there was there. So we're exploring that. Sort of with the AMA, I mentioned a few grants, which are listed here. And then this, I think, is the most relevant, is Coalition for Physician Accountability, which probably most of you have never heard of. I hadn't heard of it, but basically it's just a conglomerate of all these organizations who meet. So AMA, AAMC, NBME, your acronym salad. And that's where INCUS came from. And that was the conference where step one was discussed, going pass fail. Additionally, there's a committee ongoing that I serve on right now called the UME-GME Review Committee. And this is going to be probably more relevant to you all in about a month, because the recommendations are going to come out for public comment on the 26th. And they will dramatically affect how the match happens and what the transition from UME to GME looks like. And so stay tuned for those recommendations, but they really will have the potential, I should say, to change what your experience looks like from that transition. So, and there'll be a period for comments. So I encourage you all to comment on those. So INCUS, this was held, and based on this conference, which was really 2 days of like intensive debate and many stakeholders, our recommendations went to the decision-making board. So it was actually multiple organizations coming together, and out of that board, they made this announcement that step one will go pass fail, and that'll happen no earlier than Jan 1, 2022. And I alluded to this, but I spoke with the NBME. They can't give me the exact date. They're planning to release that in the next 1-2 months is what they told me. And really my strong sense is it will be sometime in January, but I can't promise that. And I know some of you all have step one study periods, coming up in March or April of next year. And so this is really relevant, because it's going to be a light switch of not pass, fail, pass, fail. And there won't be any grades in the score reports. There won't be any evidence of those scores. And so how did we get to that point, though? I wanted to kind of come back to the history of this because I think it is relevant. You know, there was this idea that the match was getting more and more competitive and over capacity. And while that's true, you know, there is sort of perception. And I think it's important to know that for you all, for US applicants, positions exceed applicants. Now, I won't say they're equitable. There are positions that are very, very desired, and there are positions that are less desired. But there are enough positions for US applicants, and match rates have been stable for USMD grads. So don't think that just because there's this gap between applicants and positions, that means the gap between you and positions has changed, or that the match rate has changed. It really has not. But there is this perception of increased competitiveness. And no doubt about it, applicants were applying more. And there was this idea that, you know, if I didn't apply broadly enough, I might not match. And folks got into this dilemma of, well, if the person next to me is applying to 60 schools and I'm applying to 20 schools, I might be disadvantaged. And that created this sort of arms race and prisoner's dilemma where everyone was hurt. And there was increasing application numbers. I haven't updated this since when I made it in like 2017, this slide, but it's continued to go up. The result of that was that programs faced with this deluge of applications, programs are not like medical schools. They're like little teams. It's like mom and pop shops, okay? They needed to do something. And so they used this exam, the USMLE Step 1, which was designed as a licensure exam to measure medical knowledge as a holistic screening tool, which was not designed for. And instead of saying, we just want to pass, which was 194, they actually said, well, actually, we're going to set these other thresholds, and different specialties were different thresholds. And so that really affected kind of the climate and what folks were doing. And students sought to increase their competitiveness and to drive up Step 1 scores higher and higher and higher. And it got more competitive. And where did that leave applicants? Well, like feeling like, how do I balance coursework with Step 1 prep? You know, I don't know how many programs to apply to. You know, advisors were sort of like, well, we don't want to teach to the test, but like, we know it's important for you, so study hard. And like program directors on the same end, like feel for them because they're just inundated and like, we don't have anything better to screen with. So quite a dilemma led to the decision to make it pass-fail, which everyone at INCUS recognizes is not fixing all of these challenges. And that's where the UME-GME Review Committee, the recommendations coming out later this month, will be very relevant. So what were roles of scores in 2020? This is just sort of level setting. So you all enter your med school being like, I got the facts. And you can see all this stuff on NRMP. They have great match data and reports. I encourage you to review them. And this looks at like whether tests are required and basically saying that if you fail any stage of the USMLE series, there is a much smaller group of programs that will consider you. And so passing still remains really important. It is a licensure exam, and unfortunately, the first pass attempt is important. And so that's one takeaway, is that passing is very important. And that in 2020, there were thresholds. And I'm just bringing USMLE Step 2 CK in there because there's a lot of discussion about what happens next when Step 1 goes pass-fail. And I think, you know, the thing to think about is, well, won't Step 2 just become the new Step 1? And, you know, there's been a number of pieces by students and residents that I'd encourage you all to take a look at. If you have some time and all that free time in the neuroanatomy or wherever you're at, take some time to read some of these. They're great pieces, and we can certainly send around the slides with the links, kind of exploring, well, what could happen and how might that look? But we just don't know. You know, I think there is an opportunity to avoid that happening, and there are many folks in the community who hope it won't become like that. This is another reflection from some medical students on these changes, and I can't put it more eloquently than they did in this great invited commentary, or this perspective on how things might change. But they noted for these different stakeholder groups that while your stress might go down at IU, folks who are coming from Ross University, an international medical school, might struggle to shine. And so that's a concern in this whole thing. And that might hurt folks who are coming from less prestigious schools in IE, one of the largest medical schools in the country. Some consideration. They provided recommendations about like how to react to this change. I'm not sure I fully endorse all of these. I mean, yes, distinguish yourself. That is true always. Like medical students will always try to distinguish themselves. The question is, what does that mean for you? And we'll get to that in a little bit. I think it does behoove you to start thinking about step 2. Not now. You do not need to be preparing for it now. I'll let your advisors advise you relative to your curriculum when that does start. But the things that go into step 2 are very much more clinical and clinical decision making. And it's a better exam as relates to what you have to do in practice. And so performing on that is likely going to have more of those kinds of closing doors for different specialties. And so something to know. But the last piece I really love, which is to advocate for change. Like we're in this interesting period where you have a time between now and when you go through the match. And the community is thinking deeply about these questions and the consequences. Advocate for what you want to happen. You can really make a difference. I got onto many of these committees, as you saw, by advocating, by being a strong voice, by working through channels, organizations to advance student and resident perspectives. So I really encourage you all to not just kind of throw your hands up, but if you have a great idea or a strong feeling to dig into it, to advocate. So what do residency program directors say is important? And again, I didn't know any of this stuff when I was an M1. And so I kind of wish someone had showed me this because it would have helped contextualize. But I wanted to show for you what residency program directors say is important for interviews, invitations. So that screening step. They get their applications. There's so many, they have to screen who they give interviews. And what I wanted to draw out is even pre-pass fail, there are things like your perceived commitment to the specialty and evidence of professionalism that far trump USMLE scores for most specialties. So they really do want to see your interest in their specialty, their program, your letters, your leadership qualities, your professionalism, and evidence of that, not just someone writing it, but evidence through your activities and what you do on a day-to-day basis. And so I just think it's important to provide context because the perception of step 1 is true, but it is not the be all and end all in what program directors are using. Likewise, when it comes time to ranking, what do they say is important? Well, it's like what you do on the interview day, your interpersonal skills, the feedback from residents who either worked with you on a way or worked with you in the interview day, and then professionalism, commitment. These are the things that keep coming up on a lot of these surveys. So I think it's important to just keep in context that even if there's a shift to step 2 CK as a screening measure, it is not the be all and end all. Okay. So my big red flag is that this is specialty dependent. So some of the small hyper competitive specialties, plastic surgery, dermatology, they shift their priorities based on a high number of applicants for a low number of positions. And so for them, you have to go to the NRMP website. You can see for them exactly what their priorities are. But for most specialties, these hold. I wanted to flip this script a little bit. And then when you ask these same program directors, 600 different programs, what makes a good resident? What makes someone successful in your program? This is what they say. And I think this is important for us to root ourselves around what are the things that they're actually saying are important. Professionalism, your patient care and your competence. Yes, good. That's what we want. Ethics, communication skills. Those clearly stand out as a top 5. In training exams, which is sort of the analog to step 2 CK, are important, but nowhere near as important as those other things as far as your success. So there's a bit of the game. I have to acknowledge the game, and there's game theory around getting into residencies, but there's also the longitudinal trajectory, and it's your career. This is your career, your money, your debt. So what do you want to get out of it? This is what it takes to succeed. It's being professional, having competence, being ethical, communication skills, and those are learned in medical school. Those are honed in medical school, I should say. So let's step back. So I think this is where I wanted to actually start this talk, because it was framed as like, let's talk about step one, pass fail. And I'm happy in the Q&A to go off into the weeds of this stuff because I've been living it and been in all the back rooms. But this is what you should anchor your medical school training around. Like, was it around future patient care, or was it around being a physician scientist or something else? So what is your why? After you've like brought yourself back to that, and that can be evolving through med school, like absolutely should be, but I really think like, yes, pass fail curriculum, pass your courses, but use the time you have also to explore. And I'm not saying just get by, but I'm saying it's a really important opportunity to reflect on why are you there and what does your ideal job look like. So you're not going to know this day one. I didn't know this. I still don't know what this is. It's evolving. But think about it. What does that actually look like? And there are different like sort of theories around how people are happy in their jobs. Self-determination is on the left, which is autonomy, competence, and relatedness. Person environment fit is on the right, which is the idea that like you and your environment have to sort of mesh, and that's where you succeed and thrive. But the moral is, think about when you have thrived and what that environment looks like and what settings. And as you go through your med school, really reflect on that, because it's easy to get caught up in the hamster wheel. How do I get in? What do I do? What more do I need to do? What hoops do I have to jump through? Are there hoops? 100%, of course. But you need to also step back and think about like, what do you want in your career? And I'll tell you, I have 2 kids. I'm living my career now. You get to shape it how you want to shape it. But there, no doubt about it, doors can close along the way, others open up. So once you've reflected on like, why are you there, sort of what's your ideal job as best you can, it start to set goals. And I really encourage, if you haven't, to really set your goals concretely and like write them down. For most, that's medical training. That's like the benchmark. You go to med school. Why'd you go to med school? To be a doctor. It is self-evident, but it kind of also isn't, because most clinical training imprinting happens in residency. I hate to break it to you, you're going to learn some skills in med school, but intern year is when you're going to learn how to be a doctor. And med schools do an amazing job, though, at communication skills, doctoring skills, core competence, foundational stuff that you need. So that is absolutely important, but I want to say like, that's the foundation. That may not be your whole goal for medical school. It's okay if that's a key goal, but I think most have other goals too. One of those I would posit is, what do you want to do with your career? Do you want to go into clinical? Do you want to work in private, academic, rural, community-based? Or do you want to be a researcher? I didn't even know about this, but because I didn't do a PhD, but you can apply even without a PhD, these fast track research focused residency tracks. So even at NYU, we have a fast track where instead of doing 3 years of medicine residency, you do 2 years and then you do research. Do you want to do a dual degree, during med school? Do you want to go off and be a McKinsey consultant, or do you want to do a startup? We saw folks who left med school at the end, got their MD, and went and worked for startup companies and are making good money doing that. So I want to convey possibility and options. After you've kind of reflected on goals around medical training and career selection, I think you should do goal setting around specialty selection. And that is more like, not like you should know exactly which of these 135 plus specialties you want to be today, but you have to have a plan for how you're going to explore that. And, we can get so wrapped up in, learning the, cranial nerve distributions and learning, the brachial plexus. My neuroanatomy, terrible. A key output of your training is which specialty you choose, which career you go into. You have that for life. People do change. There is opportunities for change, and we're looking at ways to make it easier for people to change specialties, actually. But it's not a simple thing. And so that deep dive exploration, thinking about all these different types of programs, programs where you can get both two boarding into 2 different types of specialties, or integrated programs which shorten your training. There's a lot out there. And so your exploration, only you can do that as far as kind of, if you knew you wanted to be an orthopod out of the womb, good for you. But most people really don't. So WMC does a great job, I think, on like career advising. I think the AMA has some recommended resources as well that they could send around. And that's kind of their model is the AAMC Careers in Medicine. So if you haven't explored careers in medicine, it's time to do so. When you actually survey med students and say, okay, it's the end of medical school, you're graduating, what influenced you to choose the specialty you chose? Personality fit with like the type of people in that specialty, and the content were the like standouts. And I think that makes sense. But the second two that I've bracketed, role model influence and work-life balance, I want a bit like big caution asterisks on. Because what will happen is when you start to shadow, when you start to say, hey, can I follow so-and-so around? Hey, can I, on your clinical rotations? Who you see is just a tiny sample of the whole specialty. And you're working on bad information always. You have to make the best of that. And you have to really test your decision. And so I think you think about who the role models are and make sure you have good role models when you are testing out a specialty. Because if you don't like it when you're with an awesome person, you're not going to like it with, the other people you might have to work with. On the work-life balance side, there are so much diversity in careers, even within each specialty. So keep that in mind when you see someone tell you, hey, this is the lifestyle, that's their N of one. You got to talk around, you get your data points and sort of figure out what you value in that balance, what that looks like. What does that mean for you? So we covered sort of medical training, career selection, specialty selection. Obviously, for most people, and this is where this all started, applying to residency and matching is important. And if that's a goal, that's why I wanted to give sort of some of that data around what matters to program directors, the ones who are doing the selection in residency. You should also think about there are other ways to apply. So some people apply to multiple specialties. I did. I applied to 2 specialties. Others apply as couples. So there's permutations here. And I think these are all part of goals. And it's worth like not sort of subconsciously being like, yeah, I want to match, but like write that down as a goal if it is. Other people say, no, I want to get my MD and go live abroad for a year, do mission work or whatever. So I just want to emphasize that there are options. You talk to your advisors at your school who can help with that. The last bullet is like the most important one, which is all of these things are common goals, but really it's like, what's your passion? I can't answer that for you. I found my passion. You saw it was sort of wandering, but I found it in education research. It kind of tied being able to do research and be at the sort of the bedside with not having to run a lab, which I found I did not enjoy. And that's what I found my passion. And I started to establish that in medical school. I didn't need to be, a grant funded researcher in med school, but I had enough of a kernel of that passion that I could demonstrate to residency programs and say, that's my passion. And if your passion is exemplary clinical care, awesome. It doesn't need to be another thing. It can be clinical care. But you got to say what kind of patients and why you love that specialty and why those patients, okay? And so you got to really, I think, hone that vision for yourself. And that takes introspection, and it's hard. I know M1 year, they throw a lot at you. There's a lot of hoops to jump through, but step back, afford yourself some time, write it into your schedule to step back. So goal setting, this is my favorite framework, is actually WOOP, which is Wish, Outcome, Obstacle, Plan. And so you can look that up as a strategy. SMART goals is another way. It's a little more sort of, I don't know, stodgy to me, but SMART goals work too. They're very like time focused, but you need a team. So this is my last slide, and then we'll end and take questions. So if you have questions, I hope you do. You need a team, and you need a dream team. Advisors are important. They give you your transactional advice. They may be, from your med school. They have a vested interest also in like advising. They kind of want certain things to happen for their medical school, but you need advisors. I would argue you need coaches. Coaches are sort of a new space. AMA is really pushing coaching. We're developing a coaching program. Coaches are focused on you setting and achieving your goals. And so that's a little different than mentors, though mentors can put on a coaching hat. Mentors provide more longitudinal, sort of broad ranging guidance. And I think this is kind of hard to conceptualize sometimes. So coaches, more focused on that, like reviewing your data, reviewing your performance, and very action oriented around goals. But you're the expert in that interaction. Whereas mentors, they bring that expertise. They're the expert and they're kind of passing on that wisdom, sharing that expertise. Other members of your dream team to think about. Again, it takes a village here. Role models and sponsors. Role models, those are those people who I just want to do what that person does. And it might not be all of what they do. I just want to do a physical exam like that person. I want to be a researcher like that person. I want to be able to speak on stage like that person. Find those role models who have those ideals, and it can be a piece, and you can choose the best pieces and learn from them. They will be there, whether at your school, at organizations you work with, or elsewhere. And then sponsors are really important for some folks. So, if you need someone who advocates for you, promotes you, this can be critical. I think this is particularly critical for those underrepresented in medicine. If you don't have enough folks who are faculty and advisors who reflect your background and understand the distance traveled you're coming from and the barriers you're facing, you need someone to sponsor and advocate for you. And so that's not just allyship, that's like sponsorship. And so seek those out, and they might not be at your institution. And that's my sort of final caveat, which is, you can get crossover between these. You might not need a sponsor, or you might need two mentors, a research mentor and a clinical mentor. And then think outside your school. Your school is great, but your student groups, if they're local or regional, national, the AMA has great student groups and organizations you can get involved with. They can find people who fit these hats. Because I'll tell you, you can't just figure this all out on your own. You need to build a team around you, and this team will stay with you, hopefully, into residency. So I'll end there, I think close to on time, saying you got this. Like, I know that was a lot. I went big, narrow, and then big. So take a breath. And then the second cartoon is acknowledging failure. You are going to fail, and that's part of really being exemplary, is setting goals that you can fail at. If you do everything incrementally, you won't fail, but you won't reach amazing goals. And so I think it's important to conceptualize, get away from sort of the performance mindset to the growing mindset of like trying to grow through your training. So with that, I'll stop sharing. These are my kids and my wife, and take questions and say there's a lot of light at the end of the tunnel. So let me stop sharing and see pictures.
Are there any specific questions you guys have yet? I can kick it off and get us lost into some of the weeds you were talking about. So I know, like, for my class, one of the big ways that we look at distinguishing ourselves is that step one score. And I know you talked about, research, volunteerism, other ways to stand out. But it seemed like on that table of what's really important to residencies, a lot of those like really important things came in the clinical years, or like leadership, your clerkship grades, those types of things. So I guess maybe if you had some advice on how to get started on standing out in the preclinical years.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think it's really building whatever that passion is, sort of that red thing, that goal, passion item. Because, for me, it was research, it was education research, and I kind of found that, and I dove into that. For others, it might be doing a deep dive at a free clinic or working in a different setting. You don't have to do everything. I think depth is important, not just breadth. And so it's finding your passion and finding ways to kind of show something beyond what every other IU student has. It's a huge class, right? And so you need to be able to show a different angle. It's tough because you're right. A lot of the stuff that they're going to be screening on in the initial screening is related to grades in the clerkships, and step 2 CK, and that you didn't fail any of these things or have any major flags for professionalism or other stuff. And so 100% those things do matter. I wish I could say they didn't matter for selection. But once you get through that first tier, then how you get sorted out of whether you're going to actually rank to match at some of these top places or the place you might desire, then comes down to those, who are you and are you a good fit for that missional alignment with that program? Some programs are very research focused, so I don't want to undersell research. There are places that are very research focused. There are specialties that are using that, even though we know the data shows that the amount of research you do in medical school and residency doesn't correlate with into practice. This is people performance chasing to say, I'm awesome and I really want to do it. But they will still use it in some of the competitive surgical specialties for screening. You got to know the specialty you're sort of interested in. And I know it's a chicken and egg problem. I fully recognize that. When I was in your shoes, like M1, I was like, I don't know what specialty. So I want to keep all the doors open. So what does that mean? I have to do everything? And so I totally recognize that. Try not to get too stressed out about that. It's okay. But that's where it comes back more to, should you maybe be doing that career exploration as early as possible? Because that will then say, hey, what do I need? What is important to those types of program directors? So I think personally, I didn't do the career exploration early enough, which would have helped me say for internal medicine and these sorts of programs, this is what they are looking at versus, some of these other specialties I was considering early. It's a bit of a non-answer, I know, but it's a tough landscape.
So then piggybacking off of career exploration, I think for a lot of the M1s right now, it's going to be really tough to get real opportunities because of our school is now pretty much all online. So how would you maybe recommend that they go about um, really doing a deep dive into what they're interested in, be it research, clinical opportunities, things like that? Like a lot of the things here are slowed down. Like at IU specifically, we have like a student outreach clinic, which used to be a really great opportunity for M1s to get involved, but they can't. I think we're starting to open it up for M1s, but up until now, they haven't been able to.
Yeah, and I think that is a challenge that hopefully will be going away. We know we were really concerned about sort of actually our M2s who are like really missing out on a lot of stuff for us. I think part of that is you do what you can. So if you can't get into the clinics right now, that so be it. But do your exploration online. There are student groups. There's Careers in Medicine actually has a lot of ton of great resources. And try to read up on these different specialties and like test yourself, see what those look like, what that might look like. Yes, if you know what you're somewhat interested in research, start to reach out to potential research mentors to say, hey, do you have projects even remotely that I could start to get on board with, and what does that look like? And don't maybe commit so early. You don't need to commit. You can just feel out the waters. I think leadership is often student groups, national groups, other things that can get you intercalated into other efforts. It's hard to show that in a substantive way because a lot of that stuff can look similar to the program directors when they're screening, to be honest. And so I think that can be a challenge, but it nonetheless is a time where if you aren't able to devote as much time to being in clinic or going to the free clinic, et cetera, the student clinic, maybe you dig into leadership opportunity, applying for positions nationally, locally, regionally. Conferences are still happening. They're happening virtually, but there's opportunities to present. There's opportunities to attend. Use your conference money, go to conferences. So, it's a multi-pronged approach. It's definitely challenges. And I think one of the things we're thinking a lot about in the UME GME review committee is how do we take into account this generation of trainees, especially when we have some off-sequence folks who might have taken a year off, and graduated at a different time, and how that looks. And so I think there will be some growing pains around that. But reflect on what you think you want to dive into outside of you have to pass your classes. You have to pass P equals MD. But beyond that, try to step back and do the exploration as best you can. I see a comment in the chat about, am I concerned that residencies are going to turn more to networking to screen applicants rather than objective qualifications? I wish I could say programs were that savvy. They're little mom and pop shops. I do not think they're going to turn to that. I think what they will turn to is other heuristics that they do have available, which is medical school rankings, where you're coming from, types of medical school students, demographics. There was concern in the last cycle with virtual interviewing that folks would recruit predominantly from home programs more. That was proven untrue. So all the data we see from the most recent match shows that, at least in several specialties that I've looked at with other leaders, that folks are still recruiting and students are still applying broadly and moving despite interviewing virtually. So it shows like you can think certain things are going to happen, but we don't really know actually what will happen. So I wish I could say that networking wasn't going to be important, but again, I will say they do want to see your interpersonal skills. And that's why for specialties that have away rotations, there's this big question mark over them for next year. And it's not going to affect you all yet. Hopefully by the time you all are doing away rotations, this will all be solved. But I'll tell you, there's a crisis right now. Away rotations are these rotations for certain specialties where you go away and you get exposure to that program. And there are many programs that will not recruit people who have not done an away at their program because that's their audition. And so effectively it moves up the match by saying, if you don't get that away rotation, you're not going to go to UCSF because you didn't rotate there for that away. Enter COVID and all the challenges with COVID, right? And what are we going to do with that? So there's a crisis right now. And there's a thought around, well, wait a second. Those away rotations were biased, filled with all kinds of bias and issues from the get-go around access, who can travel, how many you can do, the cost, who's even aware of them and being offered them. So should we even go back to that system? What are the issues there? What are we trying to achieve? So I just want to put that out there and to say, there are like deep questions about how we do selection and how we transition folks from med school to residency that are ongoing. And that's why I was alluding to those recommendations. There's going to be like over 40 recommendations, I think, coming out at the end of this month that go into some of these deep questions. Don't address all of them, but sort of get the ball rolling. And those will affect you in 3 or 4 years when it comes time to match.
So you said I think briefly that like people who are applying from like different years of medical school, like they graduated in like like 2023 or like something like that, 2022, they'll have a step 1 score and they'll be applying at the same time as we are, and we probably won't have a step 1 score. How does that work?
Yeah, I mean, I think the hope with the USMLE switch, and partly the reason they were saying sort of January, was that they're hoping that the vast majority won't, that the vast majority in that applicant pool will be non-scored, that there will be a small minority that still have it, and so it won't be enough for decisions to be made based on that score. That's the hope. We'll see how that plays out. You're the first kind of cohort, and like it's going to be a transition year. And so we're going to have to see how that plays out. There is, and again, I don't want to shadow too much of the recommendations, which are like under lockbox right now, but there is strong discussion around how information gets reported to programs. So if we think there could be inequity around that metric by having some people who've had it and some people who don't, should we even show it to program directors during selection? And that's a question that's ongoing around how that should work. Same thing for COMLEX, right? COMLEX and USMLE, you guys don't think about it, but there's all these DO schools and they end up having to take the USMLE too. And so there's ongoing discussions around how do we bring parity across a lot of different applicant types. So I think that's one of many questions. my hope is that by then we will have thought through that and sorted out how to make it as equitable as possible, rather than just having this hodgepodge of like, well, some programs are just going to like look at people who have, step scores, and how do the people who got a bad step score, do they get the option to hide it and just say, I just show pass fail? So these are questions that haven't been answered, but we need to answer them. And I just want to contextualize it in that there's many other questions, right? It's not just that one. There are other groups that are sort of niche and different things. There is definitely one of the good things to come out of the twin pandemic of COVID-19 and the re-realization of racism in America is that we are applying that to our educational continuum in a way that has not happened in many years. And, it's a good side effect that people all of a sudden like DEI. That's not my expertise, but I think it's a beautiful thing because it means that finally we're thinking through these processes through an equity lens, and a diversity lens as well, and a workforce lens. Like, who are we serving at the end of this pipeline? Like, are we actually aligning that with who we're trying to serve? And we know there's good data on outcomes related to alignment of who you're serving. And so I say that because before it would have been sort of lip service of like equity across these different groups. Now I think people are actually thinking, wait a second, that's pretty unfair. And we need to think about real measures to address that. And guess what? We can change, we can adapt. So I am sort of bullish, hopeful that they will address some of those issues.
So I'm going to get us a little off topic here. Sorry. There's a couple of third years here as well who are about to start their rotations. And so I don't know if you have any advice for us on how to be introspective as we go through rotations and really evaluate which specialties are good fits for us and which specialties maybe aren't so good.
So hard, and I'm N of one, right? So all my advice, right? Bring in your dream team, get your dream team. I hope I can be a bit of an advisor, but there can be others who you need to work with. My biggest caveat, and I alluded to it, is that role model. Like, we know that that's how most people, it's like this fit idea, which is, first of all, again, very subjective and very laden with what your particular experience is. And I don't know how IU works and other schools work, but where I went to med school, you got rotated on very different services, and it was just chance where you got to rotate and who you rotated with. And so you have to be careful painting a whole specialty with that brush of what your experience was. On the other hand, it was your experience. You don't get to do it twice. And so how do you temper that? I think it's really kind of going in, talking with people, trying to really ask other people. You're going to interact with a lot of people. Maybe you're working with just this one team, but ask a lot of people what they feel like that culture is like, what they feel like that specialty, what do they love about it? Like, what drew them to choose that? The residents, particularly, recognizing that they won't be residents forever, right? So when you're at the residents, if they're hating their life, they won't be residents forever. Also the attending. So not just the attending that you love, but also maybe the attendings that you work on a short case with or who are rotating on briefly. Ask them about career stuff, not just show off how awesome you are. They love to talk about that stuff, and it will give you a lot of information because they may say all this stuff about why they chose what they chose and why it's the greatest specialty ever, and it may resonate absolutely nada for you. And if that's the case, you're like, okay, like, that's good reasons, but that didn't resonate with me at all. But if the stuff they say, you're like, okay, yeah, that really makes sense. Then you go to a different specialty or a different clerkship, and all the people there are saying similar sort of reasons for why they chose it and what was really resonates, why they love it. You want to get people who love it. You're trying to find if it's a good match for the people who love it, right? You don't ask the people who hate it. They're just like, ask why they hate it. But if their reasons resonate for you, that for me was really helpful. And I struggled with this, and you're going to struggle with this. I will say, this is a really important decision. And unfortunately, right now for the third years, it's really hard to change specialties once you enter residency for funding reasons. It's actually based around how CMS funds residency programs, which is that they only get paid based on what you initially start as. So if you switch, they lose a lot of money basically. So that decision is really important. If you get to the end of your third year and you feel like you need more time to test that decision, I really think more people need to take more time off in that gap to test that decision. It is the rest of your life, okay? You need to step back, not for the reason so that you can get into the most awesomest ortho program in the world. That is like something people do all the time, and I have my own opinions on that. You do it if you want to, fine, but to test your decision about what your goals are for your career and whether that's the right specialty, if you're not like pretty sure, I think that should be done more personally. Again, that's just me speaking, because it's hard to change later. There's a lot of activation energy. You do that intern year is really hard. You don't want to go back and do it again somewhere else. And people do, but it can be really hard. And I think we see a lot of burnout later on where folks say, I wouldn't want to do this again because they maybe didn't test it so much or have the opportunity to test that decision, or they didn't find something else. So I really hope folks test their decision and think about alternative pathways. Think about other cool things you can do in your career, which can help keep you motivated and energized. And then I see a chat about sources. Yeah, I think Careers in Medicine is great. You know, I really do. Double Aim Sentence is an AMA talk. Careers in Medicine is great. AMA has their own stuff through the AMA medical students section is awesome too, to talk with other medical students. You know, talking with M3s, M4s who are going through this process, but aren't at IU, right? You're getting a little echo chamber at IU or wherever you are. Talk with folks. If you're BIPOC, you know, talk with folks from other institutions who face challenges and who are their sponsors? How do they navigate this bias process? You know, you got to advocate for yourself. So try to get outside of just your career advising. I'm sure it's excellent, but go beyond that. Go to student groups. Careers in Medicine is a must do early, just has a lot of good information. And then, you know, your leadership stuff will interact with other people. Ask them those questions, you know, same questions people are asking here. So taking a break. So again, this is for the person who's like, doesn't have a clue. Like if you have no clue, I really recommend against just choosing something random, right? Because it's a huge decision and it's really hard to walk back your specialty choice. It's usually between that third and fourth year. Your school will tell you more about when they prefer folks to take that year off. And again, I wouldn't just take it to go, you know, surfing in Hawaii. You take it to do something you can show to programs that you are doing something productive, of course, but at the same time, maybe you're exploring, maybe you're building up some other strengths and other things. And so, plus there are amazing programs out there that are one-year scholarships that exist all over the place. I mentioned the Luce Scholars Program. You can do that in the middle of med school. We have med students who did the Luce program. So there's programs like that that are 1 or even 2 years. We've seen folks do Marshalls and come back, you know, go to the UK and come back. So again, try to think outside the box. I'm just trying to, because you're going to get very inside the box, a lot of recommendations, but it's usually after clinical, like get through preclinical. I recommend it after clinical as opposed to between preclinical and clinical. You haven't had the clinical exposure. You don't know if you need more time to explore. So it's like, I really think that specialty decision is so important.
You mentioned how you got,
Go ahead.
You mentioned how you got into research, but you didn't do like the PhD route. Can you maybe talk a little bit more? Like, did you do any research in med school that kind of leaned you towards that and making you yourself feel prepared to step into that role?
Yeah, I as you can see, I was like very research focused for many years. I did a master's in London, but I never got any higher research training per se, and I really vacillate on whether to do a PhD. What I will say is, as you start to do research, you will quickly determine if this is for you. Like, there's the balance of like what you want to play the game, and everyone's going to play the game, and I don't fault them for playing the game of how to get into X specialty. And some specialties really value research. Unfortunately, that drives people to do it who don't really want to do research. And that's really sad to me because their passion is something else that they should be doing. But for me, I got into it and I was like, yeah, I really like this. But what I don't like is being on an R01 grant cycle funding. And it's, stuff around running a lab, keeping the lights on, distress. It's going to give me an ulcer seeing my leaders, research leadership dealing with this. And what I found was a space in research where I felt like I could be more of a clinician researcher, bring the clinical side. Yep, I'm not going to be getting the $5 million NIH grants, but I'm on a $1.5 million AMA grant and a $200,000 AMA grant and a $20,000 AMA grant. So I've got 3 grants right now. It can be done, but I'm not running a massive lab. So I made that decision. If you're going to run a lab, if you're going to be run clinical trials, you pretty much have to either fast track, which is going to research residency, or do some kind of master's during med school at some point or above. So if you want to have that ownership, you got to have, unfortunately, some of those credentials. Very few. There was a prior generation, I would say, where MD onlys running labs, doing clinical trials. That can happen. But nowadays, most folks really, to kind of stay up with other peers, are getting some of that credentialing and taking that year off to do, a master's in public policy research, or, these other types of master's degrees. Is that helpful?
That was. I'm thinking more, I'm not trying to run a lab. I'm more so, I like public policy kind of research.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you, what was your master's in again?
It was called Masters of Research. It's like an MS program basically in the UK. So a lot of statistical methods and research design stuff. But there's so many cool masters out there. Again, get out. There's MPHs. A lot of people do MPHs. Great if you want to do public health. But like a lot of people don't do a lot with their MPHs. So I really encourage folks to think about master's degrees that get you skill sets that you can market later, that you can use. There are masters in like real hardcore clinical research, informatics, public policy, business. These things you will use and will bring you unique skill sets. If you're a true public health person who's going to go work and do public health, go do the public health masters. Yes, but make it applied to what you're doing, not just to be able to work for a year in some cool place, if that makes sense. I see a fair amount of that, unfortunately. So I hope that's helpful, a little bit helpful. Yeah. I see a comment. I know we're short on time, so if folks can stay, I'm happy to stay. Folks have to peel off, they should peel off. There are rumblings that programs may require essays to help reduce the amount of people applying and use that as a way to show true interest in a program. Do you think that's a realistic possibility? Well, Karam, I will tell you that was tried once. That was called was tried by otolaryngology. It was called a personalized paragraph. Basically, it was a secondary application. You remember those from med school. There is thought around potentially adding elements that are program specific, but I don't think anyone finds the personal statement to be the most useful part of the application right now. In fact, uniformly across program directors, they will say the personal statement is the least useful part of the application. So I think there's very little interest actually for programs to go to more text. What programs want, they want a number. They want a number that says, hey, if that number is above this, they're going to do great in my program, so I don't have to do any work. I'm being a little facetious, right? They're good people, but they're burdened. So they actually want the opposite of what you're saying. They don't want essay text. They want more screening measures. We're pushing back on them to say, well, what's your mission? If your mission is primary care, you want to be able to recruit for primary care. If your mission is to serve inner city populations that care for X type of patients, you should recruit people who want to do that. So there's tension there. What I think will happen is that there will be some changes to the letters of recommendation. So again, stay tuned for that. Emergency medicine has a standardized letter of evaluation, a SLO, and that does basically take not your writing, but other people's writing and put it into constraints around length, around topic, and normative, saying, where does this person fall? And I think there will be more movement, though time will tell, to that, to help program directors say, we're getting all this information, we're awash in information actually, but what is it, what of it is real, what of it really stands out, and what aligns with my mission as a program director? I want to recruit people who do X awesomely. So I wouldn't worry about that too much, what you're saying. There are other concerns that I have. Yeah, definitely interesting. We'll see.
So I have one last question, I promise.
That's
You had
fine.
a really
I
good.
don't hear the kids like completely decompensating with my wife. So like, let them be. This is the best part of my day, y'all. I get to be actually on with you. So
You had a really nice slide with the tables of what residencies thought were important. I was wondering if you could share that again and then maybe just talk through it real quick one more time, because I think that one slide probably answers a lot of M1 students' questions about what they need to be focusing on. And I think it'll hammer home the point of introspection and really looking at yourself and evaluating your passions. I think that sort of numerically enforces that.
yeah, and again, I want to encourage folks, and I'll send out it. You can send around these slides to your class. I totally feel good with that. So, and it'll have like the link here for the NRMP main residency match data. But the source of a lot of this data is from this. And so if I click on this, let's see if I can get it to go there. It'll bring up this page. And on this page, there's tons of data. And
You're
it
really
goes.
sharing the PowerPoint with us.
Sorry, let me see. Let me share the whole thing. New share. You get to see my here. So it'll link to here. This is what you should see. And on this, there are various reports. So there's reports about the match results. This is kind of in the weeds. What I want you to focus on are two things. Charting outcomes in the match, senior students of USMLE schools. That's you. This one, charting outcomes, really important. It's long, but it's a good read. This will tell you the data, the real world, not what people are saying. This is what's happening. And then the program director survey. So the last survey was a little flawed because the response rate was very low. It's done in March of COVID. So if you want to see the older data that's better, you can actually go up here to the report archives, and there's all the archived reports are all here. So if I click on charting outcomes in the match, or I want to do the program director survey, again, it's long, but how it's structured is it goes through all this data about the match in that year, the different specialties. And again, this is program directors responding. How many programs responded, the response rate. And where this data that I was sort of compiling was I was taking the importance ratings from some of these surveys and looking at what factors were important across specialties. And I was alluding to that if I choose anesthesiology, they're going to have different importance ratings for different things. So let's say here, for anesthesiology, step one, much more important for them. They're a more competitive specialty. And if I were to go to family medicine, less so. So that was what I was showing. I think, again, there's a lot of information out there. You all are in an interesting spot, and it's just is what it is. Things are changing right now. COVID is uncertainty about getting in rotations, uncertainty about, and you have to live with that uncertainty and that flexibility. And I'm sorry, I wish I could tell you what's going to happen next. I do not know. Anyone who tells you they do, they don't know. I'm in the back rooms, and I don't know what's going to happen. Okay. So you have to accept some of that uncertainty, but build control around the areas you can, research, look at stuff, do your best, and remember why you came to medical school. Get back to your why, like anchor yourself in that, because you can get in the weeds of the brachial plexus. I don't remember even how many main branches are in the brachial plexus. Like when is the last time I've used that? I don't want to diminish the importance of the course you're on right now, but keep perspective on what really, really matters, which is the rest of your career for 30 years. So yeah, I think we should end there. I'm seeing some children running behind me. So
thanks for coming out and giving this talk. It was a lot of good stuff for us.
Yeah, you're so welcome. Thank you all for coming out on this evening, and feel free to share the sides. I think you have it. Send them
Yeah.
around. I just ask that anyone who got them doesn't share them outside of your institution for now, because they're sort of via AMA.
Awesome. Thank you.